When a man secretly misses you, it is not weakness that fuels this feeling. It is the undeniable truth of the void you leave behind. Imagine a presence so grounded, so unwavering that the world adjusts around it. When a man starts to feel your absence, it is not random and it is not trivial. It is the consequence of the impact you made, the standard you set in his life without even asking for recognition. He does not just miss your face or your words. He misses the order you brought to his chaos, the mirror you held up to his better self, and the undeniable reality that his world feels smaller when you are not there. The first thing that always happens is the subtle behavioral shift. He may reach out more cautiously, speak differently, hesitate before responding, or become uncharacteristically reflective. These are not manipulations. These are psychological signals that he is confronting the absence of something meaningful. Human beings are wired to notice disruption in emotional patterns. And when someone valuable is gone, that disruption becomes impossible to ignore. The very silence you create is the loudest truth he will ever hear. The second thing is the intensification of emotional pull. When you are always available, presence becomes mundane. But when you step back, live your life, and hold to your boundaries, a remarkable phenomenon occurs. He begins to recognize what he cannot command. Scarcity, when paired with integrity, creates weight. It is not about playing games or forcing attachment. It is about existing with self-respect, about refusing to shrink for someone else's comfort. This pull is not just desire, it is the recognition of value, the realization that what he once took for granted is no longer at his disposal. The mind notices what is absent far more acutely than what is present. He is confronted with a mirror that reflects both what he has lost and what he still yearns for. The third and perhaps most crucial thing is the awakening of reflection. When he misses you, he begins to reevaluate his own choices, his own priorities, and his own capacity to appreciate the people who enrich his life. Absence forces confrontation. It strips away excuses and exposes uncomfortable truths. He cannot avoid the realization that the space you occupied is not easily replaced because you were never replaceable. This is not about arrogance, it is about understanding the natural order of human relationships. Value is recognized through consequence, not convenience. You do not bend for others. You do not diminish yourself to maintain temporary attention. The longing he feels is the outcome of your strength, not his weakness. Understand this. Nothing in human psychology is random. The shift in behavior, the intensifying pull, the reflection, these are inevitable consequences of a presence that is self-assured and boundaries that are non-negotiable. You do not create longing through desperation. You create it through discipline. You do not command attention through clinging. You command it through unwavering self-respect. Every step you take away from someone who does not prioritize you is not abandonment. It is the assertion of your worth. And in that assertion, he cannot help but notice. When a man misses you, it is often because he has been confronted with a truth he cannot escape. The value you bring is real, tangible, and irreplaceable. He may not articulate it. He may not approach it with clarity, but the internal reckoning is happening. And this is where strength becomes invisible power. Your absence is not a void. It is a signal. Your boundaries are not barriers. They are mirrors reflecting the consequence of your presence. In every message he hesitates to send, in every thought that drifts toward you uninvited, there is acknowledgement of your impact. He is grappling with what he lets slip, and in that grappling, he gains awareness of what matters. So let this be clear. You do not need to chase. You do not need to beg. You do not need to shrink to accommodate uncertainty. The strongest influence you can exert is the simple act of existing fully as yourself, letting life move, holding your standards, and maintaining your integrity. When you do this, the universe obeys a subtle psychological law. Absence illuminates value, strength inspires longing, and self-respect commands recognition. If a man misses you, it is not because you forced it, it is because he finally sees the depth of what he overlooked. And in that recognition, you are untouchable. Not because of control, but because of consequence. Not because of manipulation, but because of truth. You are the measure of what cannot be ignored. Every step you take in confidence, every boundary you maintain without apology, every life you live without seeking permission, it all reinforces the one undeniable fact: you are worth missing. When a man secretly misses you, these things will always happen. And when they do, remember this: your power lies not in pursuing him, but in honoring the strength, presence, and clarity that made you unforgettable in the first place. The silence of absence reveals true value. Think about that for a moment. How often do we chase attention, plead for recognition, or bend ourselves into shapes that others find convenient? Yet, the reality is far harsher, far more revealing. It is not in presence, it is not in constant engagement that value is measured, it is in absence. When you step back, when you remove yourself from the constant noise and demand of others, the world around you begins to reflect the weight of your presence in ways you could never manufacture through desperation. Absence is a mirror. It forces people to confront the truth of what they had, what they have lost, and what they took for granted. And make no mistake, this is not about gamesmanship. It is about natural consequence. When you are gone, your impact becomes undeniable. People notice. Patterns shift. Emotions stir. Recognition is no longer optional. It is inevitable. Consider the human mind. It rarely values what is always available. Familiarity breeds a dangerous kind of blindness, a quiet erosion of appreciation. You can be generous, intelligent, compassionate, and still be invisible to someone who has no need to pause and reflect. But the moment that presence is withdrawn, when your energy, your attention, your being is no longer on automatic demand, something profound happens. Silence begins to speak. It does not shout. It does not manipulate. It simply makes the absence impossible to ignore. This is the first law of true relational psychology. Presence alone is invisible, but absence commands attention. The second truth is that absence forces reflection, not for you, but for the other person. People are compelled to reckon with their own choices when the comfortable availability they have relied upon is no longer there. They remember the laughter they missed, the strength they ignored, the guidance they refused, and the light they assumed would always be at their disposal. Absence creates a cognitive vacuum, and the human mind instinctively seeks to fill it. It begins to question, to evaluate, to confront uncomfortable realities about their behavior. And here is the critical point. This is not something you orchestrate with manipulation. It is a consequence of integrity. You maintain your standards. You uphold your boundaries. You refuse to shrink yourself for temporary attention, and the vacuum you create compels recognition. The third revelation is that absence reveals true alignment and discernment. Not everyone will pause to appreciate the value you bring. Some will not notice at all, but those who matter, the ones capable of understanding worth, will inevitably confront the reality of loss. They will recognize not only what they miss, but also what they failed to honor. And this is the paradoxical power of absence. It exposes the superficial from the significant, the fleeting from the foundational. It separates those who are anchored in convenience from those capable of genuine respect. When you step back, you are not punishing anyone. You are revealing the landscape of truth, the map of consequence that people are too often unwilling to navigate. Absence also strengthens your own presence. To step away requires courage, discipline, and self-respect. It is easy to seek validation. It is far harder to withhold it without resentment. But in doing so, you cultivate a rare form of power, the power to exist fully on your own terms. You are no longer dependent on reaction, approval, or attention. You become a standard, a measure by which others unconsciously assess themselves, and that, paradoxically, is what makes your absence felt so profoundly. You are no longer available to fill someone else's gap. You are instead demonstrating that your value is inherent, undeniable, and independent of anyone's recognition. Now, consider relationships, careers, and life itself. When your presence is constant, patterns remain unchanged. Mistakes are repeated. Neglect is ignored. Appreciation is withheld. But when absence enters the equation, systems adjust, behaviors shift, and clarity emerges. This principle applies universally in partnerships, in friendships, in professional contexts. Your absence is not void. It is signal. It communicates without words. It enforces boundaries without aggression. It commands attention through consequence, not coercion. And the people who understand this will respond not necessarily immediately, but inevitably, because the silence you create exposes a truth that cannot be unacknowledged. Finally, embrace the profound lesson in all of this. Absence is a test, not a threat. It measures value not by external validation, but by internal impact. It is a mirror for others and a mirror for yourself. It teaches patience, reinforces self-respect, and illuminates the natural order of consequence in human behavior. When you withdraw, you are not diminishing your power, you are revealing it. You are letting life, reality, and the fundamental laws of human psychology confirm what you already know. True value is never created by noise, attention-seeking, or compromise. It is revealed in the stillness, in the silence, and in the space you leave behind. So remember this, the silence of absence is not emptiness, it is clarity. It is the measure of your worth. It is the undeniable proof of the difference you make simply by existing fully, authentically, and unapologetically. When you embrace absence, you are not surrendering control. You are asserting truth. You are allowing reality itself to reflect back the power, influence, and irreplaceable value that only you possess. And in that reflection, the world and the people in it cannot help but notice. Behavioral shifts are never subtle. Pay close attention, because this is one of the most revealing truths about human psychology. When a person's feelings change, when a man begins to secretly miss you, the transformation is never hidden. It shows up in his actions long before it appears in his words. Humans are creatures of pattern, creatures of habit. Our emotions dictate our behaviors in ways we often fail to notice until the deviation is undeniable. If someone begins to feel your absence, the first things to shift are the small, almost imperceptible routines, the timing of messages, the tone of his voice, the frequency of interaction. These shifts are not accidents. They are unconscious signals, psychological tremors that reveal longing, awareness, and recognition. And the moment you learn to read them, you gain insight into truth that words alone could never provide. Consider this. When someone truly values you, their behaviors adjust to reflect their internal state. The casual indifference, the patterns of neglect, the complacency, they all begin to waver. He may hesitate before responding, pause before committing, or subtly seek out your attention in ways that are almost invisible. But these micro adjustments accumulate. They become patterns that cannot be ignored. The first signs are often quiet. A slightly longer glance when your eyes meet, a subtle shift in posture when you enter the room, a change in the cadence of conversation. If you are attentive, you can see it. If you are disciplined, you can recognize it. Behavioral shifts are the language of truth. They speak louder than promises, declarations, or superficial displays of affection. The second layer of this phenomenon is that actions expose priorities faster than words ever can. Words are easy to craft, easy to manipulate, easy to conceal. But behaviors are inherently difficult to fake consistently. When he begins to miss you, the priorities you once assumed were steady may suddenly reveal themselves. Time is allocated differently. Effort is invested selectively. Attention, which may have been casual or distracted before, is now focused and deliberate. He may reach out in unexpected ways or show care in areas previously neglected. These actions, even if small, signal a deeper awakening, a confrontation with the reality that your presence matters more than he allowed himself to admit. And yet, the truth about behavioral shifts is often ignored. People expect grand gestures or overt declarations, thinking that emotional change requires spectacle. But real psychological change manifests in subtle, persistent, and consistent deviations from the ordinary. A man who misses you will not always announce it loudly. He will demonstrate it. A single pattern of repeated behaviors, a check-in at unusual times, unexpected thoughtfulness, increased curiosity about your life reveals far more than pages of written words ever could. Actions are the DNA of emotional truth. They are the proof of feeling, the architecture of recognition, and the manifestation of internal reckoning. Furthermore, these shifts force awareness not only for him, but for you as well. Observing behavioral change gives you information, a map of human intention and subconscious acknowledgement. It allows you to see beyond what is said and into what is truly felt. This is why discipline and observation are so vital. The ability to notice the shifts, to discern the meaningful from the incidental, transforms your understanding of relationships. You begin to recognize the consequences of absence, the impact of integrity, and the undeniable signals that emerge when someone's emotional equilibrium has been disturbed by loss. Behavioral shifts are also a reflection of power dynamics, subtle yet profound. When you maintain self-respect, uphold boundaries, and refuse to compromise your standards for temporary approval, you create a psychological environment in which your value cannot be ignored. The resulting shifts in behavior are the unconscious recognition of this power. They are not always controlled or intentional. They are the natural consequence of a human mind confronting something it cannot manufacture, cannot manipulate, and cannot dismiss. In this way, your strength, discipline, and clarity become the catalysts for change in others, often without a single word from you. Another critical aspect is consistency. Behavioral shifts, unlike fleeting emotions, tend to accumulate and reinforce themselves. One small act may be insignificant, but a pattern repeated over days, weeks, or months is impossible to overlook. When a man misses you, these patterns solidify. They become his unconscious way of negotiating the absence, reconciling regret, and acknowledging the impact you had on his life. Each repeated action is proof, each consistent deviation is evidence, and each subtle effort is a signal that your presence has left an imprint he cannot erase. Finally, the lesson is clear. Never underestimate what actions reveal. Words can deceive. Appearances can mislead. But behaviors, those minute, persistent, and often unconscious shifts, speak with clarity. If you pay attention, if you remain observant, you will recognize the truth long before it is verbalized. When a man misses you, his behaviors will expose it. The timing, the effort, the attention, the small deviations from the ordinary. Behavioral shifts are never subtle, and in their revelation lies undeniable proof of emotional reality. Emotional pull intensifies without dependency. This is a truth few truly grasp, yet it is one of the most powerful forces in human relationships. The moment you stop leaning, stop bending, stop trying to fill a void that others refuse to acknowledge, something remarkable happens. The gravity of your presence becomes undeniable. Human beings are wired to respond to consequence, to scarcity, and to authenticity. When you are constantly available, constantly accommodating, constantly seeking approval, the weight of your value diminishes in the eyes of others. Dependence signals need, and need can often be mistaken for weakness. But when you step back, when you exist fully without clinging or craving, you create space for recognition, longing, and reflection. The pull grows, not because you chase it, but because you refuse to manufacture it. Consider the psychology behind this phenomenon. True desire and recognition cannot be forced. They are awakened by absence, by boundaries, and by self-respect. When you operate without dependency, you are no longer performing for validation. You are no longer sacrificing your standards for fleeting attention. You are simply being yourself, living your life with integrity and letting others witness the consequences of their own choices. In this environment, the pull intensifies because it is authentic. It is the natural outcome of a person realizing that what they once assumed would always be available is no longer guaranteed. Scarcity does not create attachment artificially. It exposes the value that was always there, but often overlooked. The second layer of this truth is clarity. Emotional pull without dependency allows relationships to be measured against reality, not desire, convenience, or obligation. When a man misses you, it is not because you forced him to notice, but because your life, your strength, and your independence create an undeniable gravitational effect. People are drawn not to weakness, but to strength. They are pulled not by pleading, but by the subtle, undeniable consequence of your self-possession. And this pull is amplified because it is unscripted, unmanipulated, and uncontaminated by neediness. The very act of existing fully without depending on approval or attention awakens longing that words alone could never produce. Another profound element is respect. Emotional pull without dependency teaches respect without demanding it. When you stop adjusting, stop compromising, and stop shrinking yourself for someone else's comfort, you set a standard that cannot be ignored. People respond to those who honor themselves, and longing emerges naturally from recognition of integrity. Dependency blurs lines, it softens impact, it dilutes value. Independence sharpens perception, heightens awareness, and intensifies connection. In other words, the more grounded and autonomous you are, the more magnetic you become. Because the pull is no longer about obligation, it is about acknowledgement. This principle is especially powerful because it flips the typical narrative of pursuit. Most people believe that to be desired, they must chase, accommodate, and compromise. But the truth is the opposite. The less you depend on external affirmation, the stronger the pull becomes. It is a paradox, but a simple one. Neediness repels. Presence grounded in self-respect attracts. Emotional pull is not about coercion or manipulation. It is about the natural consequence of a life lived with integrity, boundaries, and clarity. It is about creating a psychological space in which absence becomes meaningful, attention becomes voluntary, and recognition becomes inevitable. Consider the subtle ways this manifests. When you live without dependency, small behaviors and patterns shift around you. He may check in more often without prompting. He may notice details he ignored before. He may reflect on moments he took for granted. These are not controlled or orchestrated. They are natural consequences of the reality you have created. Your emotional stability and independence act as a mirror, reflecting not only your worth, but the choices others have made in response to it. The pull grows because it is authentic, and authenticity cannot be ignored. Another crucial aspect is the sustainability of this pull. Emotional intensity generated by need is fleeting. It burns bright but dies quickly. Emotional pull born from independence is enduring. It is rooted in consequence, recognition, and respect. It is the long-term gravitational force that draws attention, thought, and reflection without compromise or manipulation. The difference is stark. One requires constant maintenance and effort. The other arises naturally from self-possession. When you stop depending on his attention, the pull intensifies precisely because it is rare, real, and consequential. Finally, this principle is empowering beyond relationships. It teaches that your life, your energy, and your value are not contingent on someone else's engagement. You do not need permission to exist fully. You do not need validation to confirm your worth. When you embrace independence, you unleash a force that is impossible to ignore, the magnetic, undeniable pull that comes from living with integrity, clarity, and strength. Emotional pull intensifies without dependency because it is the natural reflection of truth. People are drawn to what they cannot control, what they cannot demand, and what they cannot manufacture. Your absence is not empty, it is magnetic. Your self-respect is not distant, it is compelling. Your independence is not rejection, it is revelation. The strongest pull, the deepest longing, and the most undeniable attraction emerge not from need, but from self-possession. Step back, hold your boundaries, live fully, refuse to compromise your standards for fleeting attention. When you do, emotional pull intensifies naturally, irresistibly, and inevitably because it is rooted in truth. Dependency fades. Longing rises. Absence creates presence. Silence becomes weight. And in that weight, your value is finally undeniable. Self-respect triggers recognition. This is a truth that is as powerful as it is often overlooked. People are drawn to those who hold themselves to a standard, who refuse to shrink, compromise, or degrade their value for the comfort or convenience of others. Recognition is never earned through pleading, begging, or bending. It is earned through the unwavering acknowledgement of your own worth. The moment you establish boundaries, honor your principles, and insist on integrity in every action, you create a psychological force that cannot be ignored. Self-respect is visible, tangible, and magnetic. It communicates a simple yet profound truth. You are not negotiable, and your presence is consequential. Consider this carefully. Humans are wired to respond to strength, clarity, and consequence. When you respect yourself, others are forced to confront the reality of your value. Recognition does not arrive from manipulation or effort. It arises naturally as a consequence of steadfast self-possession. Every choice you make, every boundary you enforce, every moment you refuse to compromise becomes a signal. It is a silent declaration that your time, energy, and attention are finite and therefore precious. The world notices. The people around you notice. And inevitably, those who previously overlooked, neglected, or underestimated you begin to reassess their own behavior. Self-respect is a mirror that reflects the truth back to others. When you live with unwavering principles, you expose the contrast between who you are and who others allow themselves to be. You reveal the difference between value and convenience. You demonstrate the power of discipline, clarity, and integrity. People respond not because they are forced to, but because human psychology cannot ignore authenticity and strength. Recognition is the natural consequence of consequence itself. Those who once took your presence for granted begin to understand that your attention, care, and energy are not automatic. They are earned through consistency, boundaries, and self-worth. Moreover, self-respect is inherently magnetic because it is rooted in autonomy. Dependence signals need signals compromise, and compromise often dilutes value. When you hold yourself with integrity, refusing to bend to whims, expectations, or manipulations, you create a gravitational pull that is irresistible. Recognition follows because it is drawn not to what is given freely without consideration, but to what is earned and sustained through personal standards. The act of respecting yourself forces others to recognize you not through coercion, argument, or persuasion, but through the undeniable consequence of your presence and the impossibility of taking it lightly. The power of self-respect lies also in its ability to inspire reflection. When you refuse to compromise, when you insist on your standards, you force those around you to confront uncomfortable truths about their behavior, their choices, and their priorities. Recognition emerges as a result of this confrontation. People are forced to see the impact of their actions or their inaction because you have made it clear that your value is not negotiable. Your standards are non-negotiable. Your principles are visible. Your boundaries are unavoidable. And in that space, recognition becomes inevitable because it is the only rational response to a person who honors themselves fully. Self-respect also creates clarity in relationships and interactions. It separates those who are capable of genuine acknowledgement from those who are not. It exposes who will rise to meet the standard and who will retreat from it. Recognition, therefore, is not indiscriminate. It is selective. Only those who have the insight, integrity, and willingness to engage with someone of high value will respond. And that is precisely why self-respect is so transformative. It filters out what is superficial, transient, or unworthy, leaving only interactions that reflect genuine understanding and alignment. Importantly, self-respect does not require attention, approval, or validation from others. It is self-sustaining. It does not fluctuate based on external response. And paradoxically, this independence is what triggers recognition most powerfully. The world cannot ignore someone who stands firm in their identity and values. The absence of neediness, the presence of strength, and the commitment to one's principles act like a gravitational field, pulling acknowledgement, respect, and reflection toward the person who refuses to compromise. Recognition is the natural byproduct of consequence, the logical outcome of someone who knows their worth and acts accordingly. Finally, the lesson is universal. Recognition is never a gift. It is a reflection of what you project through self-respect. You cannot manufacture it with flattery, manipulation, or compromise. It emerges when you are unshakable, disciplined, and unwavering in your principles. Every moment you honor your boundaries, every choice you make with integrity, every refusal to sacrifice your value for temporary approval contributes to an invisible yet undeniable force that commands attention and acknowledgement. Self-respect triggers recognition because it is the embodiment of consequence, strength, and truth in a world often content with mediocrity and convenience. When you respect yourself, you set the standard. When you uphold your boundaries, you reveal value. When you live with integrity, recognition is inevitable. It will not always arrive immediately. It will not always arrive as expected, but it will arrive because the natural laws of human behavior respond to consequence, clarity, and authenticity. Stand firm, honor yourself, and let the quiet force of your self-respect illuminate your value. Recognition follows naturally, irresistibly, and inevitably, not because you demand it, but because you deserve it.